Welcome to the Global Sales Mentor Podcast for conversations that drive growth. When you are ready to grow your international sales, join the conversation with your host, Zach Selch.
Welcome to Conversations That Drive International Sales. I have an old friend of mine, Leo Prozument here, and Leo is really also an old timer in terms of the international sales business, but he has been really focused on a really interesting part of the world, on Eastern Europe for the most part, and he spent a lot of time in Russia. So Leo, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. Pleasure to be here. And thank you for welcoming me and giving me the opportunity to speak to you and your audience. My name is Leo Prozument, and I have done business in Europe for over 20 years, and particularly the Eastern European sector. I've actually lived and worked in Russia for 8 years, in Moscow, Russia. I've managed two Russian-owned companies that wanted to be westernized. That's the term I'm using now. And I helped them go through the process in the reorganization and making each company that I worked for to be able to sell in their successive markets and operate successfully in the long term as well.
Great. And now you've done business in other parts of the world, and you've done business in Europe, but you've spent a lot of time in Russia. First thing I'd like to ask you is talk about what's different about Russia, if you don't mind, about doing business with Russia, because it's a really interesting market and it's a lucrative market. We sell a lot, people who sell well are selling in Russia, right? There's money there if you know where to find it, but it is a difficult market if you don't know what you're doing, right?
It's an extremely difficult market, and for a number of reasons, and I'll try to outline that as best as I can in the briefest of times. As far as the culture is concerned, and I'm talking about specifically the business culture itself, Russian people have only started really actively having opportunity to own a business in the early 90s,
right.
when communism fell and opportunity opened up for many individuals who were knowledgeable in the business that they would acquire, or not knowledgeable just because they got lucky and they acquired it.
Right.
And I can even back up a little bit in terms of how the businesses were distributed. So when the government
that's an interesting point too. Yeah.
Let me talk about that. This is when the society was able to actually, or the communism fell, and the society was somewhat open to privatization and owning businesses. Nobody really knew how to do it. That was the first main issue. The second main issue was that when the government fell and all the government and subsidized businesses went into private hands, they were basically distributed. Factory opened up, and then there was just a bidding war for who would want to acquire this factory, and usually it was, pennies on a dollar, because government was just wanted to get rid of it,
and very often, let's talk about who ended up owning those businesses, Leo.
The people that were close to the government. So they were able to get the leg up on the competition, so to say.
I used to say you met a lot of businessmen with black leather jackets in Moscow back in the 90s, right?
And bodyguards behind them.
Right.
So that, in a sense, how business in Russia evolved. And in the 90s, once these people began managing these businesses, there became competition. The competition did not come from the industry itself or from the rival companies. It came from people that wanted to acquire successful businesses. And what I mean by acquire is that they would knock on your door and they would say, for this amount of money, we're going to take your business away from you. And if I would I would agree to that deal.
Right.
Exactly. So there was a lot of my colleagues have gone through it. Some of the colleagues that I know of have actually lost their lives in the 90s. Believe it or not, and it was very.
I remember the level of security and the level of. We used to say it was the Wild West, right? It was like there was a lot of violence around business in the 90s in Moscow.
well, there was no credit. So it would basically, people that would either have cash or would have to borrow it. Those that borrow don't return the money, that would ultimately, if they
Right.
can't repay, they would lose their life. And that's how the whole business world was just full of gangsters.
Yep.
And that was the 90s. So from that point on, from that era of the 90s, we jump into the 2000s. And this is where Putin is in power. And pretty much the lawlessness of the business environment has gone away, but the
One other
corruption
thing,
stayed.
sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
just in terms of the years also, what I used to look at was if you were about 40 when the wall went down, you had spent your whole life under communism. You had studied under communism. You were used to the system. So during the 90s and the beginning after 2000, all the people in power had grown up in communism. Now you're getting to that period just after 2000, 2010. You're already seeing college students who got out of college or people who got out of college after communism, right? So you're seeing new blood, right?
Exactly. You see new blood, and you see a hungry public that demands good product and service that they see is out in the West.
Right.
And that's a perfect description and summary of the 2000s. Is
Right.
where you have the young generation asking for product, asking for services, asking for the lifestyle that they see on TV of their American counterparts, not just TV, but
Right.
also reading about it. And then, of course, it was the internet era, so people are able to have an open platform for exchanging information,
Mhm.
for doing the research, and of course, understanding how the world operates in much better terms than before.
Right.
So from that point on, you have people that are much more educated, much more knowledgeable, and they are the ones that start to get into the business world.
Right.
However, again, because of the history of the 90s and the past, they still do not have the practice. They may have the
Right.
brain, but they don't have the practice of actually owning a business and operating a business.
Right.
And this is
And they
where,
didn't see their parents doing it. It's not like you grew up and you saw your dad working in a company, your dad was a capitalist. Here are these people, they didn't have any connection with capitalism, right? It was strange to them until 90. Yeah. It's
yeah,
interesting.
and those that did were usually they came from those rich parents that
Right.
they were able to be successful in the 90s. So yes, there were two versions of that public. Correct, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting market and interesting times because you also had a boom, right? I remember, when the sushi restaurants popped up in Moscow and the malls and all of that, right? People were spending money.
Well, the especially in the way, let me even go a little further in terms of the geography of Russia. It's the geography itself is huge, and you're looking at only few concentrated areas of buying power, and the
Right.
rest of the geography is you're looking at lower middle class to low class,
Right.
and then there's actually homelessness
Right.
and even beneath that. So times were extremely rough, and that's why businesses try to operate in the sectors that would that would give them the money and the buying power, and they would go into the cities with they would call them million people cities,
Right.
with people with populations of a million plus, cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc. And that's where most of the businesses started their operations.
And talk a little bit maybe about the sales process, what differentiates building rapport with your customers in Russia and working like that. Because it is also, I remember it's an interesting culture. There is a lot of warmth working. I've had some partners, some distributors in Russia that I had really good relationships with. We had a lot of fun. I remember sitting in their apartments at midnight, drinking vodka and eating sausage, that kind of thing. It's a specific type of business culture, right?
Absolutely. It's the business culture of people.
Mm.
It's a people culture, I say, because trust is a very important factor in the Russian society. and Russian culture. And they are very trustworthy people. So, especially in business, they will open their arms to you if they like what you're selling and they like what you offer, and they see that there's a potential to get major rewards from the relationship that you established with them. So they open their arms to you, and Russian people are extremely open and transparent.
Right.
There's really nothing that they hide, and they say what they think, and they do what they say, which is
But
extremely important.
if you screw them over, they
It's
don't like
over.
that.
It's
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 over.
it's over. The relationship will be
They
over.
are. They're
Exactly.
totally open. Once you've established that trust, you're their friend. They're totally open. But if you abuse that, you can't fix it, right?
There are no second chances.
Right.
Absolutely, and I've experienced it myself. Making some mistakes where I shouldn't have made them, and I paid for it. And I learned as I went along, and as I lived, through the years in Moscow, I became much more fluent to the feelings and to expectations that they have for people like me.
Right.
So when you establish this trust and you go into business with Russian people, what you get is a partner, a loyal partner that's gonna do as he promised,
Right.
which in most of the times it would happen, and a good paying partner where Russian people understood that there's a high risk of doing business with them. So they are able to create a safety net of cash flow where they can pay in advance for any type of orders they would like to bring into the country in terms of product.
Right. Right.
Which is extremely beneficial. It kind of gets me into the area of doing business in Russia,
Right.
for companies in US or in Europe. So we can
Yeah.
talk about that if you wish.
Please, please. Yeah.
So when the Russian market opened up, and I would say more in the 2000s, because in the
Right.
90s it was more localized. It was
The
more
90s were wild. Yeah.
exactly. It's a wash. So it's just establishing the businesses and trying to survive. The 2000s is where you start to look at joint ventures, and you start to look at bringing products and buying products from overseas and bringing them to the Russian economy and selling them. And the demand was huge. So
Yeah.
you had all of these businesses in various sectors, oil and gas and transportation and consumer electronics, pro audio video, anything that had to do with anything. There was a demand for bringing international products, not made in China, not
Right.
made in Russia or elsewhere, but made in US, made in Germany, made in France. That was a big demand. And you could easily establish partnerships.
Yep.
You could easily move the product through logistics if you
Yep.
know the right channels. And you get paid fairly quick, and you can make fairly large amount of money.
Yeah.
That was in 2000. So that was, the shift was towards doing business with overseas companies. And then in the mid 2000s is when US companies actually started doing business and looking actively to get into themselves into the Russian market by establishing offices and warehouse space,
Right.
as well as building manufacturing facilities in
Yeah.
Russia.
So what were you selling at the time, or what different products did you sell in Russia during the 90s and then after 2000?
So my career doing business with Russia started with a company called Peerless, and they were doing or manufacturing TV mounts for flat panels and
Okay.
plasma televisions, and that was a boom for flat mount displays at that time
Right.
when TVs, those CRT boxes
Yep.
started going away, and then people started getting into the flat panel much more, especially those that you hang on the wall,
Right.
and that's where the TV mounts came in, and Peerless was a very substantial company in U.S. marketplace, and I was instrumental in bringing them along into Russia, and that was my first introduction of doing business with the Russians, where we established partnerships with a number of distributors that were able to distribute our product in Russia, and that was my first foray into do business there.
Great.
Yeah,
Great. So totally different direction. Kasha. Do you know Kasha?
of course. of
Right,
course.
because I know there's a different word for it in Russian, but you know kasha. Do you like
No,
kasha
it
or
is the word. The word for kasha in Russia is kasha.
like kasha or you don't like kasha?
I love kasha.
I love
Love kasha.
kasha too. My wife hates kasha. I think one thing you find with Eastern European Jews, either you love it because you grew up with it or you hate it because you grew up with it. But I love kasha, and every time I'm in Russia, I eat kasha as many times a day as I can.
You know, it's an old dish, and it can be made out of different ingredients. But
Right,
here in America, the equivalent of it is, of course, is oatmeal.
right.
But you know, kasha in Russia you know, making it in Russia is a science. It's not just, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
it's the pack where you
I
just put some
I
powder in
brought
a.
home one year. I brought home like some really high quality kasha. Now it's still maybe like $2 a kilo, right? But it was like the best stuff they had in
Right,
the store.
right.
My wife
Very,
was
very healthy.
Yeah, my wife was still like, okay, it might be the best there is, but it's still crap. I don't want to eat it. And I'm eating it myself. And then my next question, as a follow-up question, are you a banya guy?
Not really. No. You know, I can stay there for maybe half hour or so, but I just get bored. It's not for me. But I'll tell you that is major part of the culture.
Yeah.
And I would say most of my friends, 99% of them, love banya. And there's actually one in Chicago, in the city. I'm not sure if you know.
Oh, you know what? I've never made it there. It's called
Yeah,
like Red
the
Squares.
Red Square. That's right. That's
I've
right.
heard about it. I've never made it there. I go to the Korean one in Chicago, but when I go to Moscow, I always make sure to get to a banya. You know, if you're only once a year, twice a year, you don't get bored with it. But for listeners who don't know, a banya is a steam bath, but it's the Russian steam bath, and it's very different from other places. And one thing I'll say, in virtually every other bath type place around the world that I can think of, the Russians eat the heaviest food in a bath. So imagine a room full of naked guys wrapped in sheets,
Right.
eating smoked fish and drinking vodka,
And drinking
right?
vodka, absolutely.
And
Salads everywhere. Yes.
right, and
Sausages. Yeah.
sausages, smoked fish, salads, vodka. There's this great thing which is honey and lemon and seltzer water, which
Maybe like lemon, like a 7 Up type of
well, no, they give it. Well, the ones I've had, it's just sparkling water, and then like they give you a little tub of honey and a sliced lemon, and you squeeze the lemon, put the honey, and then mix the seltzer.
I've never
I don't
tried it. Zach, this is something that I'm learning now from you. So maybe
okay.
I'm the one that should be doing the interviewing here.
So that's something I picked up. I picked up from the banyas. And you go and they give you, or well, you have to buy everything. It's not cheap, I'll tell you that. But you get like a big thing of oak leaves, and they hit you with the oak leaves and all that. But it's a lot of fun.
Exactly. And it's an experience you stay for, 3-4 hours.
Yeah, it's an experience. If you ever, if you go to Moscow for business, I always tell people, go to the ballet if you can. And again, I'll tell you what, one thing that's good about the Bolshoi ballet is they probably do 150 shows a year or something. It's not you can get tickets for it. And I always go to the banya, to a bath. Those are two things I love when I'm in Moscow.
Now, the question to you is, do you go to banya before the Bolshoi Theater or after?
You know what? I don't think I've ever been able to do the same thing at both of them in the same day. But I usually end up going to the banya about 7, 8 at night after a day's work.
That's right.
And it's usually, and I'll tell you what, everybody's really nice. They look at me like I'm, it's obvious to them that I don't quite belong, but nobody's ever been, said anything to me or anything like that. Everybody's been welcoming. So.
Oh, now Russians, if you meet them, especially in Russia, are very closed. They are not approachable.
Right.
So that's, the fact sometimes plays against them, because people think that they are either, very negative or not trustworthy or cold or whatever it may be, but not really. Russian people are just very closed, and they don't like to smile much. Unless there's a need for it. There are no, as we say, fake smiles out there in Russia.
Right.
And that's, when I came to Russia, I was, smiling all the time. I would go through the offices and greet people. Hi, how are you? How's everyone doing? Cracking jokes. People weren't used to that.
Yeah,
And to them, I was some kind of I brought them some energy that
right.
they never really seen before. So to them, a person from America, from overseas is something, there's some type of a aura that comes with it, from their perception. So
Oh yeah, yeah. I felt that also. And there's, there, I think most Russians who, lived through at least some of the communist times, they looked west and they were thinking, well, we want this. And they do see people from the West, see Americans as something a little special. And I've had some really good, I think you're right there. It's hard to get past the initial contact. You have to build up some relationship, but everybody I do business with has always been very warm and very kind to me, and that kind of thing. And they do seem very, very sincere and true and all of that. Yeah. And
extremely,
over the years, I've done
extremely.
some really good business in Russia, and it's a very interesting market. And like we said, it can be a little difficult. There were times. Did you ever have to deal with barter back in the '90s? Did anybody ever try to pay you in
Yeah, with
timber or something
jeans,
like
or
that?
yeah, there was at one time there was a huge phase of the iPhones.
Oh,
Everybody wanted to get the latest iPhone, so everybody, when I was living there, they would ask me because I would travel back and forth, so I would spend 3 weeks out of the month in Moscow, and then I would come back here for a week, and then go back again, and I did that for almost 8 years. And while I would go back and forth, people would constantly ask me to bring uh,
oh yeah. No, I was thinking,
goods
I
for them.
remember in the '90s, there were periods of time where some of the people I did business with couldn't get hold of cash. So what they do is they'd say, look, I can give you, $1 million worth of timber
Yeah,
delivered at the, in the port, in a port, if you'll take that as in payment.
yeah, yeah,
There was a period of a couple of years where we had to do some acrobatics to get paid, because people could get hold of timber, they could get hold of oil, they could get hold of furs, they couldn't get hold of dollars. So getting money out of Russia a couple of times was pretty tricky, but I haven't had that problem in 20 years. Yeah.
yeah, and it still is tricky. It really is. Getting money out of Russia is not as easy as it is to get it out of different countries.
Right.
Which brings us, to today. How is it to do business in Russia today? And
Right.
I'll
And
tell
you're
you,
still doing business, this is still one of your primary focuses is doing business in Eastern Europe, right?
somewhat, yes. Although I'm much more spread out in Europe than I was
Right.
before. But yes, Russia. I was able to gather a number of reputable companies. So my network in Russia is large, and it's been gained over the years with
Right.
associations with different people in different industries. But doing business in Russia now is very difficult for one reason only: the sanctions and the devaluation of the ruble.
Right.
It's affecting the economy since 2016, when the market crashed in Russia, and when sanctions were imposed, when the situation happened with Ukraine. The opportunity for business to go into Russia have changed tremendously.
Yeah.
People are now much more considerate about opening up anything in Russia, just because of the economic and the world situation of what's happening in the country. Um,
Yeah.
and the ruble now is pretty weak. So you're looking at doubling the price of a product that normally costs less, and it's very, very
Yeah,
difficult
it's
and
hard. It's hard for them to justify that. It's hard for them
tough
to.
to justify and tough to afford as well.
Right.
So you're only having maybe 1 or 2% of the population that is able to afford an iPhone, for example.
Right.
And those
Yeah.
that buy the iPhones usually spend their last earned money for it. So in Russia, there's a saying: it's better to look good
Yeah.
than to feel good.
Yeah. I remember all the secretaries in the offices that I'd go to. They would all have, beautiful fur coats and beautiful shoes and all of that. And Like I remember they didn't make any money, but they would find a way to make sure that they had a nice coat and a nice pair of shoes when they were on the street, going home from work and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, no matter where you are, people would go just to go to the store. They would put on their nice clothes, and that was another difference between America and Russia. America is a country where it's a culture of comfort.
Right.
In Russia, it's complete opposite. In Russia, it's you have to look your best. You have to look presentable. You're gonna go to Starbucks, well, you better dress up.
Right. Yeah.
So
That makes perfect sense. That
yeah.
makes perfect sense. So what other tips? So somebody who, let's say you got somebody you're talking to and he's done a lot of business in Germany and France and England, and he's on his way to his first trip to Moscow to meet with some Russians. What are 3 tips you would give him to help him out?
Only 3, huh? Well, the first tip is that
What?
don't take
Let's stretch that out. Let's
well,
say
let's
go
try.
as many tips as you want. We got time.
I'll listen. I'll speak from my head because it's not a prepared list. So
Right.
I'll tell you the first thing that jumps in my mind is when you land in the airport, do not take the taxi. The taxi service at the airport.
Good point.
That's that my biggest. If there's only one advice that people will take from this, do not take taxis from the airports.
Yep.
So you would want to, they don't have Uber anymore. They did kick Uber out. So you would want to find out from, if you have a colleague, you have to have a colleague. You can't just go into Russia cold. So you would have to hopefully have some people that that can recommend and give you some type of a support system in moving around Russia. So logistically, it's very, very difficult.
But you use the metro, right?
So I always use a metro or taxi.
Right.
If you use a taxi, you have to be very careful that you use it in certain times of the day.
I was actually going back about, I want to say back to about 2000. Somebody tried to mug me in like one of the old gypsy taxis, the ones that were just a regular Lada car type of thing.
Yeah.
Somebody tried to rob me, and I ended up literally getting into a minor fight and, jumping out of his car in the middle of nowhere and just running to get away from him. Right. So I know, and I want to say that's the only place in the world that's ever happened to me before in a taxi, but, yeah, so it can be a little dicey. I usually take the train in from town just also because it's a lot faster than taking a taxi or a limo to go from the airport to Moscow. Sometimes the train is just so much faster.
It's the best metro system in the world,
Yeah,
by far, even better than UK, which also has Russia actually emulated their metro system from UK.
right.
But it's amazing. Basically what you do is when the second point I'd like to make.
Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Go on.
No. But it's all gonna, they're all gonna intersect anyways. But the second point is that if you are gonna schedule meetings in Russia, do not schedule more than one, at the most 2 meetings. You cannot have one of those 5.
Moscow. It is hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and not just Moscow, anywhere really in Russia, logistically wise, transportation is very difficult, and to get from one place to the next, it's difficult in the sense that it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, and it's unpredictable, right? You don't know what the traffic is going to be like. Yeah,
completely. And even in the metro, just to get somewhere, it's going to take you an hour.
Right.
By the time you change stops and then you have to walk, and you may, in a lot of occasions, after metro, you take a taxi to get somewhere.
Right.
So in that regard, do not schedule more than one meeting because it's taxing to schedule more than that.
Right.
The energy factor in Russia is very low in terms of the way that people. I would say that if you're a foreigner and you've never been in Russia, and you land and you go to your hotel, I would say that it would probably take you 2 or 3 days to get yourself back up to where you are before, because it drains so much energy from you, and it's the air, it's the atmosphere. Sunshine is a problem in Russia. They did it.
Everything's gray. Yeah,
everything is gray. They say that there's the sunny days in Russia are maybe 75 days out of the year is when you see sun. The buildings are all painted this gray, yellow, brownish color. It's just horrible. It's like the worst color palette you can pick.
And they don't clean the sidewalks, so in the winter, everything
it's
is covered with
extremely
ice.
dirty.
And
All the
yeah,
cars
very
are
dirty.
dirty.
Yeah,
If it snows, good luck. Nobody really washes their cars because there's no point to it.
right.
So just that whole factor creates this atmosphere of negativity, and it
You're making
drains
it
your
sound
energy.
really attractively.
I know. Well, listen, it's a reality, but
Yeah, yeah,
we can talk about the pluses for days, and
right.
Russia has many positive things about it. Another factor too is people don't like to leave voicemail. So if you're
Oh, yeah,
expecting that someone's going to call you and leave a message with details, not going to happen. The way that people leave voicemails in Russia is they call you. If you don't pick up, they'll just hang up, and
right.
they will expect you to see that there's a missed call that you have to call them back. So.
Or somebody will say, wait in your hotel, we'll send somebody, to pick you up or something. And you'll wait for 3 hours because they won't specify what time. Yeah,
That doesn't happen too much. Usually they're very punctual. Again, it depends on the traffic,
right,
which is always a problem. So it's very difficult to come to a meeting on time. You really have to leave your house way in advance.
right,
So that's definitely a problem still to date. Logistically speaking, it's a very difficult country to move around.
right, right. Yeah.
But
Any other tips? You said you'd have a lot. Now,
well, listen, as far as business opportunities, Russian people are extremely educated. They're very well educated.
yeah,
They're probably one of the smartest people in the world. I'll give you one example. You're in the metro at any time of the day, you will see around you most of the people in the train reading something,
that's true.
newspaper,
That's true. Yep.
books,
Hardcover books. Yeah, like real
very
books,
well
not
read.
from their phone. Yep.
You don't see that too much, unfortunately, in the US. You just don't.
Not anymore. You're right. But
Right.
also, you take a look. If you don't know very much about Russian culture and you grew up in America, you heard about communism, you picked up the propaganda we grew up with as kids. But the educational system in Russia, in terms of math, in terms of science, has always been very good. You get fantastic engineers, and if you're looking for a very specific type of physicist or engineer, you can probably find those type of people from Russia. So they are feeding into their own tech industry. You don't see a lot of like high tech companies. I would say more because of the lack of the capitalist experience and the entrepreneurial experience. But in terms of good workers, good educated people, there are a lot of very well educated people in Russia, right?
Extremely. The level of education is phenomenal in Russia. Many foreign students actually go to Russia to study,
Yeah,
especially students from Africa. That's the
right.
big destination from them. Um,
And a
Also,
lot of people it used to be Egyptians. I know a lot of Egyptians who studied in Russia. A lot of Africans. Yeah.
it's still the same. Still the same. A lot of students go. Moscow has a number of different universities that are
Mhm.
world level.
Yep. I've
The
worked with people from Russia, engineers from Russia who studied at Russian universities, who were fantastic physicists and chemists and other engineers. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, another factor too is in terms of medicine. That is a very important factor, that you want to make sure that um, you don't have any health issues when you go to Russia, because God forbid if you do
That's
wind
a
up.
nice way of putting it, Leo.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
you do wind, if there is a risk of something happening to you health wise, and there's a risk of you winding up, in the hospital in Russia, I would not, I would not recommend to go to the hospital in Russia or any
And I'll
medical.
tell you what, I've been selling medical equipment most of my life, right? So it's not that the doctors aren't good, it's that the equipment in the hospitals isn't very good,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Yeah, like I've seen hospitals in Russia with really the type of equipment you would see in the 1950s in the United States or 1960s in the United States. But the level of the medical personnel is very good, very highly trained, very highly motivated medical personnel.
Oh, a lot of them actually train overseas too, because not, it's an open border now. You get
Right,
visa and you can go to Germany. You can go to, a lot of people actually go to the Baltics to study
right.
IT and become IT engineers or consultants, programmers. A lot of the Ukraine right now, a lot of people in Ukraine are IT focused. So a
Right.
lot of programmers you'll find that not only come from India now, but they're coming from Ukraine and Russia and the
Oh,
Baltics.
yeah. 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 Definitely.
Big
Definitely.
pool talent, big pool talent.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. And anything else, what's the best story, the funniest story you have about doing business internationally, whether Russia or not? What's the story that you tell when you're out drinking with your friends?
Well, okay, I'll give you the story. This is a funny one. It was my first dinner with a Russian business person who became my future customer and actually my future employer. So when we met at a restaurant, and one of the things too, customs in Russia is that when you do meet with customers the first time, you always follow it up with lunch,
Right.
or then if you're visiting, out of town, then you follow it up with dinner, and the dinner usually lasts till 4 or 5 in the morning.
Right.
So this particular situation, same thing. We had a big meeting, finalized our contract, decided to do business together, decided to celebrate the same night. So we went to this one of the very prestigious restaurants. It's called Uzbekistan, where they actually bring out the waiters bring out a roasted pig, a whole pig you can order. Amazing place, amazing food. And the owner of the company that we were doing business with, he got so drunk that he called the driver, because they all have drivers.
Right.
They're calling designated drivers. So if somebody cannot
Right.
drive, they will call the driver to come and relieve them. So lo and behold, the driver came, joined us for dinner, and he got drunk.
So you ended up driving home.
So basically, no, thank God I did not. No, but it took me a couple of days to get back myself together.
I remember it used to be bottles of vodka had a cork in them, not a cap, because they would say, well, if you're already opening it, you're just going to finish it anyway, right?
Exactly. There's no way that you cannot finish the bottle of vodka. Every bottle of vodka has to be empty.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There were some interesting times in Russia. I remember also one thing that got me, and you don't have this because you read Russian, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So in the 90s, I remember it was really hard to identify a restaurant at street level because the sign, they didn't typically have a big sign. They had a little sign. And very often they didn't have windows open on the street level. That might have been a security thing. I'm not sure. But I remember I memorized, the only thing I knew how to read in Russian was the word for restaurant, because I'd get to my hotel and I'd walk the streets and I couldn't find a restaurant. And I would look at, you'd see 10 different little signs and I'd be like, nope. Ah, restaurant. Okay, maybe this building has a restaurant in it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, most of the restaurants are situated inside on the first floor of the apartment building.
Right, in an apartment.
I've actually lived in one. I've actually lived on top of the grocery store,
right.
and a couple of restaurants. And also one thing too is Russian buildings that were built during the Stalin era. And there are humongous pieces of architecture. You're talking about thousands of people living in one building.
Right.
With multiple entrances. Insane. And then basically they would rent them out to restaurants, grocery stores, shoe repair stores, whatever it may be. So the lower level is all stores. Everything above is residential.
Right. Yeah, it was interesting times. Well, thanks a lot for talking to me, Leo. This is great.
Pleasure.
I hope this is going to help out, and can people reach you on LinkedIn?
Yes, Leo Prozument. I'm not sure if you will be posting it somewhere. This podcast.
I will be. I'll be posting this on LinkedIn, and I'll send you a copy. But anyway, thanks a lot. Join us for Conversations that Drive International Sales. And if you ever have any questions or anything like that, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my website. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.